Okay, thanks a lot, Tom. And now with the main event and the introduction of our guest speaker, here is Chris McCaskill. Chris?
Well, this is something that I think everybody in Rotary has been looking forward to, and we can tell from the turnout that this is an issue that is of great importance around the world, around the country, in Mexico, and in San Miguel. In fact, Rotary International has listed the scarcity of potable water worldwide as one of its 6 areas of focus. And San Miguel's Midday Rotary, through its rainwater harvesting, has partnered with local grassroots citizen organizations and SEDESA to build 1,450 family cisterns. But we have today the executive director and founding member of a key player in water issues from Caminos de Agua, and that's Dylan Terrell. And he is the director of an organization that's comprised of Mexicans, expatriates, technologists, organizers, researchers, and educators. He's lived and worked in various Latin American communities. He has a master's degree in global sustainability and rural development from Regis University in Denver. And along with the Caminos de Agua team, he received an award from the American Society of Mechanical Engineers in Washington, D.C. for their work on low-cost water solutions. So he's going to tell us about the current state of water in San Miguel, including a new urban educational initiative they're going to launch.
Great. Well, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Can you guys see my screen okay here?
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. As Chris said, I'm Dylan Terrell. I'm the executive director and founder of Caminos de Agua. We've been working here in the region on water issues for about the last 10 years. Before getting started, I just want to, highlight and thank Midday Rotary, not just for inviting me to talk here today, but for all the work you guys have done on water here in the region. It's incredibly admirable. I've had the opportunity to collaborate with you guys on a few small things over the years, but some bigger, especially with Lee Carter. So I just really want to thank you guys. You're doing some of the most important water work here in the region. I'm honestly humbled to be here with you guys. You do some great work. And I think, if anything, the point of my presentation today here is that we need a lot more people doing this work, as many as possible, because it is it's very critical, not just for our region, but for the world. So here's the agenda today. It's an ambitious agenda. I've got my stop clock going here, so I'll do my best to keep it at a half an hour, but I might jump over a few things just depending on how we're doing for time. But I want to give some background on the water crisis. To do that, I need to do a little bit of background on what's happening globally, as well as talk about what I call the new class of water contamination. Those are going to be the 2 main themes: are water stress, global water stress, and chemical contaminants. And then talk about the regional water crisis, and then specifically a little bit of updates on what's going on in San Miguel, specifically urban San Miguel, and then what the real consequences of this crisis are, not just on health, but on other things as well. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about who we are in Caminos de Agua, what our programs are, and what we've been doing over the last 10 years now. And then ending on kind of where we go next. And if there's time, I'm totally open to have questions. I'll leave my contact information as well, and I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have later on. So jumping into it, the global water context. So the first of the 2 main issues I want to talk about is water stress or water scarcity. And specifically groundwater scarcity. So globally, this is a global water map of all the aquifers in the world, all the groundwater in the world. Now, roughly 35% of all humans get some of their water from groundwater, but about 2.5 billion people or so get their water exclusively from groundwater. And we're in that bucket here in northern Guanajuato State, where we get all of our water from aquifers, from deep groundwater. Now, roughly 3.6 billion people live in some sort of water scarcity conditions, and that number is going to jump to about 5 billion by 2050. And what does that mean exactly? It means that we're getting closer and closer to what we call day zero for lots of communities around the world. So I'm sure many of you heard of, what happened in Cape Town, South Africa several years ago, or in Chennai, India, 2019, where a population of about 9 million people literally just had their water source run out overnight due to long droughts. This is going to be, unfortunately, a new reality that's hitting more and more. Right now, it's estimated that about 20% of all the world's aquifers are overexploited. What does that mean? It means we're extracting more water every year from these aquifers than can be recharged naturally by rainfall. And this is a finite resource. We used to think that this was a renewable resource, but we're now realizing that it's not. As water tables are dropping, we're not able to recharge these aquifers at the rate that we're extracting them. And it's really only about 6% of the groundwater that we can actually reach around the globe. So that's kind of the big picture on this scarcity issue here. I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but again, I'm happy to answer any other questions later. But now I kind of jump into this other theme that I want to make sure that we touch on very specifically, and it's what I've been calling like a new class of contaminants. So this is something I know a lot of you are familiar with, but I think it's really important to continue to hit this point home. So as far as development in water is concerned, what we've been concerned about for pretty much forever is biological contaminants. That's bacteria in the water, waterborne pathogens and things like that, which is very important because it's the #1 cause of water-related illness and death around the world. But now coming in the 21st century, we don't have that luxury anymore. Now we're dealing with this new class of chemical contaminants. Here we're talking about synthetic chemicals. This is organic chemicals. This just means man-made chemicals pretty much, coming off of industry, agricultural runoff, mining, etc. A lot of you may have been hearing about new things in the US called PFAS, which is a new organic chemical that we're starting to see pretty much everywhere. These contaminants are really ubiquitous. Or you can think of things like lead in Flint, Michigan. Why is that such an issue? And basically what we're going to get to is that these are really difficult things to deal with. Even more difficult to deal with is what we're dealing with here, which is what we're going to call inorganic chemicals, or just more appropriately, naturally occurring chemicals. And in our case, we're talking about arsenic and fluoride. In our region, we're dealing with some pretty big issues with these contaminants. So in Mexico, we estimate through, we're part of a national network called INCA, which is the National Water Quality Inventory. It's a group of academics, some other NGOs that are collaborating with federal and other state governments to really track water contamination around the country, but with a real focus on arsenic and fluoride specifically, because it's a huge issue in Mexico. It's naturally occurring in most cases, not in all cases, specifically for arsenic, not in all cases. But we estimate through this network that about 20 different states are impacted with excessive levels of arsenic and or fluoride in their water, representing about 21 million people who are likely exposed to these contaminants on a regular basis in their drinking water. Globally, we're talking about 300 million estimated again, and these are mostly low-income, more marginalized communities around the globe. And so you can see that Mexico represents a pretty big chunk of that, and it's a big deal. And we'll talk a little bit about why later on, but basically we can't get rid of these kind of contaminants the same way that we could get rid of biological contaminants like pathogens and bacteria in the water. They're much more difficult to address. So honing in a little bit closer to home to Guanajuato. What's going on with Guanajuato? Well, unfortunately, Guanajuato has a baseline water stress that is extremely high. This comes from the World Resources Institute. And basically what that means is that we're using at least 80% or more of our water resources every year. It's likely much more. That's as high as that they measure. They measure water table loss in this extremely high category at about in centimeters per year. We're losing about 2 to 3 meters per year of our water table, which is some of the most brutal over extraction in the world. And so to give a little context, the most extreme example in the entire country is Baja California. They're #1 in terms of water stress. Guanajuato's at #2. So we're just behind the worst water stress. They measure this on an index of 1 to 5. I don't really need to explain what it means, but 5 basically means you're pretty much at day 0. Guanajuato is at 4.94 on that index, sorry. And so essentially what's happening here is that we're over extracting, by the data that we have from the State Water Commission, about 30% more water every year from our aquifers in the state of Guanajuato than can be recharged naturally. And that's again leading to that 2.23 meters lost per year. So to give a little context, that's over 1 million cubic meters of water per year, which is like 7 Presa Allendes, completely full, not as they were a couple months ago, but completely full Presa Allendes that we're losing every year from our groundwater tables. So zooming in a little bit closer into the northern part of Guanajuato, where we are in the Alta Rio Laja watershed, and we as Caminos de Agua have defined this area as our area of impact. We're not government, so we don't have to do it by municipal boundaries or anything like that. We can do it by more natural boundaries, and we do it by the watershed. So it's these 7 municipalities up here in the northern part of Guanajuato. And it's important that we all take this into consideration, because what happens in San Diego de la Union or what happens in San Luis de la Paz can have an impact on us, because we're connected by water. That's what a watershed is. It connects us all by the water resources in the region. So it's incredibly important to think in those terms. You know, we can't just think about San Miguel de Allende and what are we going to do for us in San Miguel without thinking about the broader context of what's going on in these other municipalities, because again, we are all linked. And so if we have massive industrial going on in San Luis de la Paz, that can impact our water supplies here, absolutely. So this region, we've got about 680,000 people living here, and about 2,800 or so communities, both rural and urban communities throughout this region. And just the brief story here is what's been happening. Well, we started drilling wells really in the late 40s and in the 1950s. And by the 1960s, we probably had about 400 to 700 wells in our watershed only. These wells were not very deep. We could drill them about 5 to maybe 40 meters deep to hit the water table, and everything seemed okay at the time. But then we started drilling deeper and deeper. Why? Because by the 1960s, 1970s, we started to over-deplete our water resources, which means that the water table started to drop. And again, we're losing about 2 to 3 meters per year now. And back then we weren't losing quite as much, but the water table was dropping. So much so that by the 1970s, after the first during the first Green Revolution, I should say, our wells dropped down to about 100 meters deep. And that's probably when we started to tap into this more fossil water underneath. This is water that's probably tens of thousands of years old. And in our case, it has these naturally occurring contaminants of arsenic and fluoride. They come from the volcanic rocks, just mingling with the water supply down there for many, many millennia. And so today, what do we have? Well, our wells now are the wells that we've studied in the last 5 years or so, that have been drilled in the last 5 years or so, are usually about 300 to 500 meters deep. We have over 3,500 wells in this region. And again, we're losing about 1 million cubic meters or 2 to 3 meters per year on this, and we're 30% over extracted. And so what that means is that we have to keep drilling the wells deeper and deeper and deeper and tapping into this much more contaminated fossil water that is much more contaminated with arsenic and fluoride. Again, this is just kind of bad luck to a certain degree. And here we can just see the number of wells drilled in the state. I just show this very specifically to show this point here in 1983. So what happened in 1983 is when they put the last, what they call the Veda decree, on the entire state of Guanajuato, which means that they already knew 40 years ago, in 1983, almost 40 years ago, that we were over-extracting our groundwater so much so that they had to put a moratorium on the drilling of all wells in the entire state without federal approval from the National Water Commission. Because they knew that we were in a deficit. They could tell it very easily just because they had to drill wells deeper and deeper. So with that moratorium in 1983, you can see quite clearly that we did not stop drilling wells. Whether legally or illegally, we continue to drill on. Again, we have over about 3,500 wells just in our watershed alone. In the state of Guanajuato, we have about 18,000 registered wells. It's probably much closer to 20,000 or even upwards of 25,000. We don't know for sure, but even at those numbers, it's incredible. And monitoring those wells is a very difficult task for the Federal Water Commission. And we can see, where does all this water go? We can't really justify the number of wells drilled and the quantity of water extracted just by growth in population. And we can quite clearly see that it's been going very specifically to irrigated agribusiness. And that's kind of one of the big themes of this story right here is agricultural use of water in our region. Now we're not talking about small scale campesino farmers. We're talking about mid to large scale industrial agricultural farming, almost exclusively for export to the U.S. and other European markets. We're extracting about roughly 85% of all of our water, all of our groundwater resources are going to agriculture. So what about San Miguel? This is the Presa Allende just a couple months ago. I think this is something that a lot of us have seen and have been very curious about and very afraid about. We can see this is the Presa Allende in February of 2011, and here we have it in February of this year. It's one of the lowest levels it's been in a long time, but we also know that we've had some of the biggest rain events that we've had in quite some time just very recently. In fact, we've had about half the rain that we would normally get in a normal rainy season. We received half the rain that we would normally get pretty much before the rainy season has even started. So hopefully it's going to be a good year. But it's a really important point to mention because we can't look at any of these issues outside of the context of climate change. Climate change is going to have an incredible impact on our water supplies. We're going to continue to see what we've been seeing, which is last year we had one of the biggest droughts in history throughout the entire country, massive water scarcity issues throughout the country. And this year now we're seeing extreme rain events. And so this is going to have a very big impact on us moving forward with infrastructure as well. I mean, once we have these, essentially what we have is a lot less rain in general, but we have these big rain events. And so that's going to cause major issues like flooding and runoff and landslides and things like that. And much of that's coming right down into the urban center. So there's definitely a need to fix the infrastructure to have to preserve the urban heart of San Miguel. Now, jumping back over from that issue of the scarcity back into the contamination issue. So, well, this map, I'll come back to this map a little bit later, but basically what are we seeing in San Miguel? We're seeing arsenic and fluoride levels pretty high. Fluoride levels in the urban zone only. You can see here some of the names of some of the colonias in the region: San Luis Rey, San Antonio, San Rafael. We're seeing levels of fluoride about 60% above the limit, which absolutely has a health impact. I know we're going to get to the rural communities where it's substantially higher and just wreaking havoc on public health. But we're seeing this with people growing up in colonias here in San Miguel who are drinking the water, or they're drinking water that wasn't treated properly by local treatment plants. We're seeing major issues. The real scary thing for these people who are actually drinking the tap water here, which are quite a few, is these arsenic levels. We're seeing in some colonias here in the urban center arsenic levels that are more than double the World Health Organization recommended limit. I think it's really important to note that the World Health Organization recommended limit is pretty, it's not super aggressive. Many other countries around the world are taking a much more aggressive stance on that because arsenic is so detrimental to human health. The US EPA says that arsenic, the goal for arsenic should be 0. So even though we have this level of 10 micrograms per liter, the fact that we're seeing upwards of 25 in some colonias in San Miguel is very concerning. And these are, unfortunately, these tend to be colonias where people are more likely to be drinking tap water or getting the garden water from a treatment plant that isn't fit to treat arsenic and fluoride from the water. So one thing I want to talk about briefly, because it's a question we get quite a lot, is the urban development of San Miguel. Yes, it is absolutely running rampant, and it is going to have issues with stress on our water supplies, absolutely. But again, it's not the main user of our groundwater here in the region. But essentially what's going to happen is it's going to put more stress on our water, and we're going to have to continue to drill wells deeper. Yes, that's going to be a reality. What that's going to happen is it's going to have a detrimental impact on quality, probably. These levels of arsenic and fluoride and these other contaminants that we're seeing, we're going to see higher levels of water quality issues. Right now in the urban center, we have 20 urban wells that feed the entire urban population. Many of those wells have gone dry. We just don't know it. But like the Mexiquito well has gone dry several times. They've drilled that well multiple times that we know for sure. And it's probably happened a lot with other wells. So as far as our livelihoods, I don't think we need to be overly concerned. What we have to be concerned about is that we're going to have to keep drilling deeper and deeper, and that's going to have more detrimental impacts, especially on more low-income colonias and communities around here in the region. The big thing that's happening right now in San Miguel in terms of water is what we're calling the Acuaférico. I don't know if anybody's heard about it, but the last administration, the outgoing administration, started investing about 170 million pesos in this idea of essentially kind of like a water highway. It's a massive price tag, and the idea is that it's going to guarantee water for 30 years here in San Miguel. So what is the Acuaférico? This is the only drawing I could find on short notice. That's kind of close, not exactly, but essentially they're not drilling wells right into the Presa Allende. They're drilling wells around the Presa Allende. It's a little bit sketchy because they're kind of, it seems like, and I'm just making some assumptions here, so don't quote me on this, but it seems like that there might be something going on here with the surface water use versus groundwater use. Given the fact that they're trying to drill wells around the Presa Allende would indicate that they're probably taking out some surface water there, which has different regulations than the groundwater use. But essentially what happened is that they started drilling these wells. There's 8 wells that they're drilling around communities around the Presa Allende. And the idea is to pump that water out of the Presa Allende and up. Sorry, I'm pointing to my screen and you guys can't see that. But to pump it out of there and then up here and then distribute it throughout San Miguel. And again, this is only going to guarantee water for the next 30 years, supposedly. The thing is that we have seen no environmental impact studies. We have seen no studies whatsoever. We've only seen press releases about this. We've tried to get that information. That information has said that it's been available. It has not been. I've searched low and high to try to find it. I can't find any real information on this. What we do know is that CONAGUA, the National Water Authority, came in and shut down the project, at least the drilling of the wells. Because they were illegally drilling wells, because again, you need federal approval to drill any sort of groundwater wells. So we're not exactly sure what's going to happen. We have a few theories, and the idea that we understand now is that they're doing the environmental impact study while they're continuing to build the infrastructure for this Acuaférico, for this water solution. The idea is that they're putting in all the tubing and all of that stuff which they can do legally while they're trying to do the environmental impact studies for drilling the wells. Whether or not those will be approved, I don't know. And again, this is a lot of hearsay, and I hate to do hearsay, but it's been enough of it that we feel like we understand it enough that we can at least give this information. And the only thing that I'll say from our perspective is that there's some potentially great issues there, specifically for the communities that are right around the Presa Allende that are going to be impacted by this. I haven't seen any studies on how that's going to impact their water quality or their water supply. And we also believe that this could potentially increase levels of arsenic specifically. I won't go into the science behind it, but there's been lots of studies showing about how centralized extraction in one specific zone can dramatically increase the levels of arsenic in the area. But again, coming back to this idea, I just want to really hit this home. Agriculture uses so much more water. Let's look at San Miguel specifically. Now, if you guys can't see that number on the agriculture use, let me blow it up for you here. Almost 93% of all the water extracted in San Miguel goes to industrial scale agriculture, almost exclusively for export, period. If we don't do something about the agricultural use of water in the long term, we're not going to make an impact on our water supplies. So what are the consequences of all this? Let's start first with the health consequences. I know for a lot of you this is probably old hat, but I think it's incredibly important to continue to talk about these issues. With fluoride, we've got a lot of things going on. Specifically, fluoride has a very strong reaction with calcium. That's why it is really great. It's probably been the main reason that we don't have to deal with massive dental issues like we used to many decades ago or centuries ago. But at the concentrations we see, it has the opposite effect, and so it starts to deteriorate calcium deposits in the body. Specifically, we see it in the teeth. This is a young girl who was only drinking arsenic or fluoride levels that were roughly double the World Health Organization and Mexican limit. What we're going to start seeing more and more here is bone, what we call crippling skeletal fluorosis, which is actually the deformation of bones in people, or the weakening of the bones. We have many stories of people breaking their femurs and things like that, young, otherwise healthy people for no other real reason. And It's important to note that fluoride is necessary. We need some amount of fluoride. We're not saying that fluoride is completely bad, but the levels that we see are having detrimental impacts on specifically children, which are much more acutely impacted by these issues. One other thing to note is the cognitive development issues. We're seeing much more. There's been several studies over the last several years that were very longitudinal studies. At least they're all over 10 years long, that were looking at cognitive development and learning disabilities in children who were overexposed to fluoride. Now, arsenic was called the largest mass poisoning of a population in history by the World Health Organization in 2002 when talking about the arsenic issues found in Bangladesh. It is completely detrimental to our health. There is no healthy level. We want zero, as close to zero as possible. Even long-term exposure to relatively low concentrations of arsenic can still have pretty dramatic impacts on health. It really impacts the skin lesions, also tied to cognitive development and learning disabilities, kidney disease, but specifically several types of cancers. The two main ones that are very associated with arsenic are skin cancer and gallbladder cancer, but it's also very closely associated more and more as more studies come out through many other agencies of lung cancer, kidney cancer, liver cancer, etc. So one thing to talk about these contaminants is, why don't we just filter them out? Because that's kind of the whole point of all of this, is that they are incredibly difficult to remove from the water. All of this, what I call the new class of contaminations, these chemical contaminants, are incredibly difficult, especially these naturally occurring chemicals that we're dealing with here. I just show this. These are some common options that people tend to have in San Miguel. They have these whole house treatment systems with carbon and UV and all these great things. Those are great for biological contaminants. They cannot touch arsenic and fluoride. These are completely dissolved ions in the water that either require superfiltration or some sort of chemical absorption. And the other issue, as far as consequences, is that we might run out of water. What that really looks like is complicated and very complex. But for one, day zero doesn't come all at once. We're already seeing it. It's happening in communities right around San Miguel. We know many, many rural communities, some, Palo Colorado, which is only 15 minutes from the urban center of San Miguel, or El Fraile, which is in the municipality of San Miguel, where their well has completely dried up and collapsed in on itself. And again, I think just to really hit it home, it's these low-income, mostly rural communities that are so much more acutely impacted by these issues. I think San Miguel is going to figure out how to come up with water. I think if the Acuaférico shows us anything, is that they're desperate to figure out how to do it, and they're taking some very interesting steps to do so. So now, with just the last few minutes, I want to jump over to who we are, Caminos de Agua. We are an NGO here, both a Mexican Asociación Civil and US-based nonprofit, but we have all of our staff and team working here in central Mexico. Our mission is to improve human health and community well-being through adequate and affordable access to clean water. We have 5 principal programs right now, which I'll just talk about very briefly. We have a water quality monitoring program, or a water monitoring program. We develop different low-cost technologies. We do community implementation, a lot of what you guys do in Rotary, probably much better than we do, but rainwater harvesting systems, sanitation solutions, treatment plants, filters, etc. We have numerous different education programs. And our newest thing that we've been working on much more over the last several years is, how do we deal with the root causes of this, especially being in a small NGO, and this is what we call in collaboration and policy, and it's trying to work together for change with different instances of government, of other NGOs, of academics, on trying to figure out how we can create more coherent public water policies. So just very briefly, the time's coming through here, so I'll just say our water monitoring program has been going on. It's our oldest program almost since the beginning. For the last 9 years or so, we've tested over 600 sites throughout the region with numerous partner universities and other groups. And we've also, through the national network that I mentioned before, INCA, we've been able to get national CONAGUA data published online on our maps, which look kind of like this. The black points on this map are areas that are just completely acutely toxic. This is water that nobody should drink ever. The red points are points here, and then this is our watershed. If you can't see, we're down here in San Miguel. I'm not sure if you guys can see my pointer, but we're down there in San Miguel. And those red points are dangerous if consumed regularly. Orange points are pretty dangerous for children, and all the green points are the ones that are okay for all the water quality norms. So what have we seen with this? We've seen essentially about 40% of all the wells and the water limits for fluoride. The Mexican norm is 1.5. We can see that 1.5 line running right along here. And as you can see, there's lots and lots of red here that are upwards of 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 times higher than limit. But then we have some other real extreme cases that are upwards of 12 times to 15 times above the limit, 12 times above the limit, I'm sorry. Arsenic, this is the World Health Organization limit here. Again, we want to get as close to 0 as possible. This is unfortunately the Mexican norm. It's one of the only countries in the world that doesn't go along with the World Health Organization limit. But we've seen levels upwards of 22 to 23 times above the World Health Organization limit, which is still almost 10 times above the Mexican limit. And those are communities where people are absolutely drinking the water. I'm going to skip through this here, just given the time. But I just want to note that all of this data is available on our website, on our map. You can actually see data throughout all of Mexico on specifically arsenic and fluoride, and it'll give you exactly who did the study, when it was performed, etc. Education is a major thing we do. We do obviously lots of community education. Most of our work is in the campo, working with different communities. But we've also spent a lot of time developing different educational programs and materials, specifically because we didn't find lots of good, useful materials specifically for these water contaminants we see here in the region, these chemical contaminants. We created other things like video workshops that we passed through WhatsApp networks during coronavirus on how people can create low water usage solutions for washing their hands and things like that. We're right now starting a conversation with the State Secretary of Education to develop more hands-on programs for high schools, which is something we've been doing for years now, but this is something to try to get actually into the curriculum. And we're starting a new educational urban initiative, which I know I said I was going to talk about that a lot. There's not too much to say. I just want to say what we're doing there is we're really focusing on the colonias that have excessive arsenic and fluoride. We see the arsenic and fluoride is the main issue for the urban center right now, even though water scarcity is obviously a big issue, but we really do see that there are many people in the urban center who are drinking this water, and unfortunately, and they tend to be in colonias that people would be drinking this water, and we're trying to impact that. I won't say too much about this, but just that we're implementing solutions a lot like Rotary is doing, but we do all sorts of rainwater solutions. Rainwater is obviously free of arsenic and fluoride, doesn't put stress on the over-extracted aquifers, and we've been doing that for many, many years. It's a really important solution, and it's the most actionable solution we can do right now. We're doing other things like composting toilets and water treatment plants and things like that. But rainwater is really the one thing that everybody can do to get a healthy, clean source of drinking water. But unfortunately, it's limited. We have to build, as you guys know better than anybody else, these massive cisterns for one family. And the need is tens of thousands of families in our region and millions throughout Mexico. And so we've been really focusing on how can we develop solutions that really make sense for these contaminants that are really hard to remove. And so that's why we also focus on technology development. We've been doing this for years. With different university partners throughout the world, developing different solutions. We have 3 major projects right now. I won't go into all of those. I just want to focus in on this last one right now, which is the groundwater treatment system. Very specifically, this is something that we've been working on for the past 5 to 6 years now. We have a full-scale treatment system operating, and this is removing arsenic and fluoride from a community well. And the idea there is for about roughly the same cost of installing a rainwater harvesting system, we can install a groundwater treatment system that instead of just serving 1 to maybe 2 or 3 families, we can serve 10 to 100 families. Right now, we're in a pilot stage. This treatment plant is online. It's bringing water to the community of Los Ricos, to specifically just 80 people right now who are participating in this pilot program. But the idea is to look about how we can continue to expand this over time, and communities that still have decent water access, we can install these kind of treatment plants that we've developed over the past 5 years, and we can scale them, which is the beautiful thing. We can scale them to population size, we can scale them to different levels of contamination, and so we can really make a recipe for a community and treat all of the, not treat all the water, but treat all of their drinking and cooking water that comes from a well at a centralized point and distribute it throughout the community. And just very briefly, I want to touch on what we're doing here right now. I know Ron Sawyer's on here. He and I are on a national network right now that's working with the UNDP and many other actors to deal with some of these more national water issues. We've been working with the state government on several different initiatives over the past couple of years, municipal government, very much so. And really what we're trying to do here is try to see how we can create more coherent water policies and management. And how do we do that? We can look at successes around the world. I mean, this is, again, we're not alone in this. This is happening throughout the world, and there's other places that are doing all sorts of really innovative things. I mean, just in our backyard in California, I read something yesterday about a municipality that's limiting all residential and industrial irrigation by 40% because of their water scarcity issues and their water stress issues. Tucson, Arizona is a world leader in rainwater harvesting. There are examples. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's absolutely actions that we can take to mitigate these massive issues. So just kind of finishing up here, just, where do we go from here? When I say that, I'm talking specifically about Caminos de Agua, but more recently, we've been able to secure other sources of institutional funding, specifically from the Gonzalo Rio Foundation, which has opened up some other doors with us, with some other groups like Ashoka and some other bigger international institutions to help us expand our impact. And so this is how we can do more and more communities, implement more solutions. And so with that, we'll be expanding to about 30 new rural communities over the next 3 years. We're working in about 15 of them right now, building about 400 rainwater harvesting systems over the next 2 years, and continue to expand out. With our solutions specifically, I didn't talk anything about AguaDept, and so I won't mention it here, but specifically I want to say with our groundwater treatment system, which are these treatment plants for arsenic and fluoride, is that after we get through this year, we have enough information on how we can actually continue to expand and replicate and scale this solution. And we're specifically working with the State Water Commission right now on how that might look over the next coming years. But again, one thing I noted that we're really trying to focus on is how do we attack the root causes of this water crisis? How do we deal with the big elephant in the room that is agricultural use of water and things like that? And it's not something that we can do tomorrow. This is, I mean, we're talking about years, if not decades. And we're committed to working on that because we think that it's absolutely necessary that we try to figure out ways to limit our water use over time so that we can begin to, at least safeguard the water we have left, if not try to heal our aquifers over time. So just ending here, I just wanted to take away, it's my least pretty slide, but just the most important things that I really want to, that you all take away here. And so one is that our water supply is finite. It's really important to note that like, groundwater doesn't go on forever. And in our case, it's dwindling and it's increasingly contaminated with very hard to remove, I stress that point, very, very hard to remove arsenic and fluoride. Industrial agriculture, again, mostly for export, is the cause of this, is the main cause of this. And this creates threats for all of us. But again, I think it's incredibly important to mention who is most at risk here. And is low income, mostly rural communities on the periphery of our urban center that are at greatest risk here. And so we've got to create a balance. That's my point number 4 here. We can't put everything into trying to deal with the political solutions right now, because again, that's years and decades. And so we have to create a balance between creating and implementing solutions that provide access to clean water, especially for those who are most at risk. But we must do that while we're also creating coherent water policy management so that we can create long-term solutions for the future. I also think it's important to know that we're not alone. There are examples around the world of people figuring out ways to deal with these issues. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to talk and learn from each other and collaborate and figure this out. And the last thing I'll say is, because people ask me all the time, it's like, yes, I do believe that this can be solved. It requires action. It requires a lot more support, but it can be solved. So just the last slide here, but I would say, what can you do? Well, we have water testing services. You can sign up for a mailing list. We just recently started a monthly bulletin where we're trying to go into these issues very specifically. Sometimes they're about our work specifically, a community project, etc. But like our last one was about agricultural water use in the region, because people were asking us more and more how does that work? And so we're trying to go deep into these different topics every month, and you can sign up for that on our website. You can educate others. Again, I think, I'm sure some of you have heard this. I know some of you have heard this talk, at least in some form or another, at least once before. But I think it's incredibly important to continue to repeat this. This is one of the major issues we are facing, if not the most major issue we are facing, at least here in northern Guanajuato, if not all of Mexico. And we have to keep educating as many people as we can. So tell your friends, neighbors. Through us, we can host virtual talks, or through Rotary. That's why I'm here today. And we also can do things like host meet and greets and things like that in your homes when COVID allows it. And obviously, you know, you can donate to us, but you can also donate to Rotary. You guys have your own amazing water program. We are also always looking for volunteers and people to help host our technical fellows. We have technical interns who come and stay with us for 6 months to a year. So there's a lot of different things you can do. But anyway, I'm about 5 minutes over. My apologies. But if you have any other information, any other questions, I'm happy to answer questions now. I'm not sure if there's time for questions now. Or you can go to our website, or there is my email. It's just Dylan, D-Y-L-A-N, @caminosdeagua.org. So with that, I will say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. And I'm going to go very fast. I'm getting some reverb here, but you did address a lot of the questions that have shown up. A couple that I didn't hear you address have to do with, did you know that there's some litigation in SMA right now against illegal water permits regarding the fraccionamentos?
Yeah. There's several things going on. I know one specifically that's going on with a group called Acción Colectiva out of León. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of those things going on for sure. And yeah, I don't know if there's a specific question there, but absolutely.
You could probably go into more detail, but time doesn't allow. And how do we remove arsenic and fluoride from our drinking water in our homes?
That's a very good question, which I should have addressed. My apologies. So there's three main things you can do. The most sustainable option would be to capture rainwater. Rainwater doesn't have arsenic and fluoride. I know it's not necessarily the easiest solution, but there are different groups here that are now installing household rainwater harvesting systems. I'm happy to provide some recommendations. And rainwater combined with a simple biological filter, really anything, will remove will deal with these issues. Probably more reasonable for a lot of people would be to install a reverse osmosis filter system. You can buy these at Don Pedro on the Salida Salaya. You do need probably a plumber to install them. They're not incredibly technical. It'll take a plumber maybe an hour or two to install it. But these are really the only commercial system that will remove arsenic and fluoride from the water is reverse osmosis. But again, it's something that everybody could have in their houses. We're talking about maybe 5,000 pesos for the actual equipment. I don't know what they're going to charge to install it, but it's not a huge expense. And it's absolutely going to deal with the arsenic and fluoride issue. And the other one is just buying bottled water from a reputable source. Most bottled water companies are using reverse osmosis treatment. And so that's why I recommend installing your own, because you're essentially cutting out the middleman. You're having someone else do it, at a centralized plant in Querétaro or Celaya, and then truck it over to you. So it's not the most sustainable option, but it's absolutely a healthy option. So I wouldn't, poo-poo it for that. But if you can afford it, a reverse osmosis system is also a very viable solution in your own household. And
Can I just interject here?
Yeah.
Our third patent involves a Brita-like cartridge for home use. And that'll remove arsenic, lead, and pesticides, herbicides, all heavy metals. It costs about $12. It'll last 3 or 4 months.
Great.
It's more efficient than bottled water.
Absolutely, yeah. Bottled water is not the most efficient for sure. So yeah, and there are some other solutions. I was just trying to give them the quick, easy answer of what you can do easily, but absolutely, there's some other very specialized solutions too. Mm-hmm.
Can people ask you questions on your website, Dylan?
Yes, absolutely. There's a web form there, and depending on what selection you test, it'll hopefully send you to the most appropriate person in the organization to answer that question. If you want to ask directly to me, again, my email's there, Dylan@caminosdeagua.org. So I'd be happy to answer those questions.
If you can answer this question in less than 10 seconds, what about the effect of contaminated water on the crops?
It's an issue. Is that?
Okay, that's a good one. People can ask more of you in person, and I'm sorry we've run out of time, but this has been an excellent talk. I think the last time I checked, we had about 60 people on Zoom, 61 people on Zoom. And I know a lot more people are going to go in and check the recording. So I really appreciate your help here.
No, well, thank you, and sorry for cutting it so close. I was trying to keep it under, but I tend to go on, sorry.
No problem. Good job, Dylan. We really appreciate the presentation. I know it's going to be available on our website. Ron, when do you think that'll be up and running?
Usually we get it up within 48 hours.
Okay, so within a couple of days, it's going to be up and running. And for those of you that want to see it again or have some friends that may want to see this very important presentation, again, Dylan, I want to thank you. And by the way, we want to show our appreciation. We have something for you. The Rotary Midday Club of San Miguel de Allende presents this certificate of appreciation to you for your presentation to our club today. A donation of 10 polio immunizations will be made in your honor to the End Polio Now campaign. We will email the certificate to you. It's suitable for framing. And again, we thank you very much for being here today.
No, thank you all so much, and thank you all again for everything you do here. Sorry.
And for all of you that joined us, I hope you got a lot out of it. We will have, of course, as time goes on, Chris, we have another great presentation next week. Can you share with all of our viewers today who's coming up?
Yes, we're going to hear from Waylon Hedegaard, who is new in the community, but who has done a really good job of taking photos all over our area. He's walked miles and miles and miles to get photos of street art. And he's going to talk primarily about what's out there and just show us what he's finding. He's not putting himself out to be an expert. He's just sharing what he's seeing and hoping that we'll enjoy that. It will be a visual presentation, so it'll be enjoyable.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Again, Chris McCaskill, by the way, is doing a great job lining up some really, really great presentations. So with that, that concludes our meeting for today. We'll see you all next week. A meeting of our Club Projects Committee is coming up next. Thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.